So I think we'll make a start now. We did get our bottles of water. Business center too busy.
There's no one in the business center.
Oh, okay. Well, she was there when I came in. She forgot. Or we got other conference. So I'll make a start now. So I want to start with the second multi-homing presentation. So this is, again, if you go into the BGP presentation folder, you'll see there's the, well, I call it the advanced multi-homing. So it's the second part of the multi-homing presentation. So rather than giving you 2.5, 3 hours worth of multi-homing, I split it into 2 pieces. So this is the service provider multi-homing part. So yesterday we talked about doing inbound traffic engineering. Okay, so we talked about how to load balance inbound traffic. Today we're going to talk about how to load balance outbound traffic. Load balancing inbound traffic, as you saw, is quite easy to do. All we were doing is announcing aggregate out, and then we were subdividing the aggregate and sending that subdivision out each of the links that we have. So generally, an ISP multi-homing has maybe 2, maximum 3 external links. So we're subdividing our address space between these external links, as well as announcing the aggregate. And we're doing things like changing the AS path prepend we use on one of the announcements on the aggregates, or changing the size of the subdivided address space as well. So those are the tools that you have for load balancing inbound traffic. At least those are the simple ones. So what we're going to look at now is how we load balance outbound traffic. So that's more important for transit providers. And it's also important for ISPs who have got connections to go to different parts of the world. So if both your transit providers are in the same region, it doesn't really matter too much. But if your transit links, say one goes to Europe, the other one goes to the US, then you don't really want packets going out to the US, coming back in through Europe, because there everything is going all the way around the world. So it gets a little bit complicated. Transit ISPs are striving to balance traffic flows more because their customers, I suppose, just can get not a very good internet experience if traffic is flowing fairly randomly through the network. So they want to try and keep traffic flows as symmetric as possible. That's just generally good operational practice. But IP traffic flow does not need to be symmetric. You know, the packet going out this way response can come back in another way quite easily. There's not a problem about that. But again, most service providers are trying to keep the flows as symmetric as possible. And so doing all this is really the original traffic engineering, just to try and balance the traffic flows as best as you can. Right, so balancing outbound traffic requires inbound routing information. Right, remember, for balancing inbound traffic, it all depended on what we sent out to the other ISP. So for the other direction, for balancing outbound traffic, we need to get inbound routing information. So we need to get prefixes from our upstream ISP. Common solution of doing this is to use the full routing table. So that's very common. You go to your upstream ISP and say, I need the full BGP table. That is okay up to a point, but actually, if you're sitting at the edge of the internet, you really don't need the full BGP table. All you really need are default routes and a few other prefixes from your upstream provider to let you do load balancing. The full BGP table is exactly the same as a default route. only the full BGP table has every single destination on the planet, whereas the default route points to an ISP who has the full BGP table, or has access to the full BGP table. So it's often much easier just to keep things simple, use default routes, rather than carrying 2, 3, 4, 5 copies of the full BGP table. So I'll show you later on in the slides comparing full BGP table version against no BGP table using defaults version to give you exactly the same end result. So some common myths before we start. The first one is that you need the full routing table to multi-home. Well, you don't. People who sell router memory would like you to believe this, but router memory is very expensive, traditionally 100 times more expensive than memory for computers for the same amount of memory. Router memory, of course, is quite specialized. It's usually faster access, more reliable error checking, correcting, and so forth. So this is why it tends to be more expensive. And of course, the vendors will mark up the memory as well. Generally, if you're a transit provider, it's good to have the full BGP table so that you can offer your customers the option of a full BGP table or a default route. So if you're providing transit to other autonomous systems, probably you do want to have the full BGP table. So transit providers I've worked with, one of them did try partial routes, doesn't really work very well. It's too difficult because a customer of theirs then wants a full BGP table to do their load balancing, and it becomes too hard. In fact, if you have a full BGP table, it can be a significant hindrance. It can make multi-homing much harder. Second myth is that you need a big router to multi-home. The size of router is actually to do with the data rates, the packets per second, the throughput. That's what a big router is about. All you need to do to run BGP is have 2 interfaces, be able to talk BGP to 2 peers, be able to handle BGP attributes, and handle a few prefixes. In fact, routers no bigger than this D-Link sitting here can quite easily run BGP. So running BGP is nothing to do with the size of the router. So a lot of the vendors are saying, oh, you need this big router just to run BGP. Not true. You need a big router to handle the data rates, the packets per second. And of course, the third myth is that BGP is complex. And I hope you can see from the workshop that what we're setting up in BGP is actually not that difficult at all. The examples I showed you yesterday afternoon from multi-homing are all very simple examples. There's nothing complicated about them. So yes, BGP in the wrong hands can be very complicated, but if you try and keep things as simple as possible, then it'll be very easy to configure. So all these examples I will show you here are simple examples. They're working, real configurations of networks around the world. Right? They're not made up. They're simple and they're real examples working on routers today. Now, some of the strategies for traffic engineering. Well, the first one is take the prefixes you need to aid the traffic engineering. So look at NetFlow data for popular sites. If you're using NetFlow, hope you know what that is. If you're using NetFlow, you can see the source address, destination address, source port, destination port of all the traffic running through your network. So some of you might be using, well, if you've got NetFlow, if you're using, NetFlow, public domain tool you've got is nfdump and nfsend. Those are public domain tools, so you export net flow from the router. It's captured by this NF-dump program, and NFSend displays nice graphs about what is going on in the network. So this is a public domain tools. It's just, you can build it yourself. It's all just scripting language. You can download it, put it on a Unix system yourself, and you can find out what's happening on your network. If you're not using NetFlow, you have no idea what's going on in your network. Most of the major ISPs have NetFlow running. And that way they can find out what's happening. Of course, if you don't want to use a public domain tool, people like Arbor Networks sell PeakFlow, which is, it's a box with all the hardware, software that will take your flow data and produce pretty graphs. But whatever happens, please make sure you're using NetFlow in your network so that you know what is going on. Again, any ISP I go to, I say, NetFlow. I need NetFlow to see what's happening. Because without it, you have absolutely no idea what's going on in your network. And you can't do traffic engineering. Prefixes which are originated by your immediate neighbors and their neighbors are going to do a lot more to aid load balancing than those from AS's many hops away. So here in Mongolia, we generally connect to where? US, Hong Kong, Europe. That's generally where the international connections go. So those destinations are going to be very useful for doing traffic engineering. So destination in, say, South Asia, Africa, Australia, South America, not interesting. Right? They're no use to you for doing multi-homing. Because they're many hops away, many ASNs away, and the connectivity to those ASNs could well change anyway. Right? They could well change. So you're wasting your time if you're using or trying to use autonomous systems that are many hops away from your network. You want to concentrate on what's close. Right? So concentrate on local destinations. And use default routing as much as possible. If you must use the full BGP table, be careful how we do it. And I'll show you how we do this in the examples coming up. So the first one we'll look at is one upstream, one local peer. Second one is one upstream and a local exchange point. So this is the next level up from here. We're going to look at two upstreams, one local peer. This is where it gets a bit interesting. This one will show you how to do it with full routes and how to do it with partial routes and defaults. And so the two ways of approaching it. The third one, three upstreams, different bandwidths to each upstream. I'll show you why having too many upstreams can get complicated. So this is a typical way of how you'd handle load balancing with three upstream providers. So you see this one is actually, this is quite a bit more complicated than those three. All right, so these ones, fairly typical in a small economy. This gets more common when you want to have two upstream providers, so we show you how to do that. I put one local peer in just as an example, it's not needed. All of these examples assume that the local network has their own /19 address block. So each example shows, has a /19 address block. I just had to pick an address block to use for examples. So one upstream, one local peer. This is very common in many regions of the internet. We connect to the upstream transit provider to see the internet, right? They're the ones who are giving us our international transit. And with the local peer, we connect to the local competition so that local traffic stays local. As I was saying yesterday, it's very, very important to connect to the local competing ISP. If you don't do that, then you both end up paying a huge amount of money just for local traffic. And of course, the local internet is then very, very poor. So you tend to find most regions competing ISPs will connect the networks together. So all to save money and improve the quality of service. So the picture of this, here we are. We've got the local peer here, so it's a local ISP we're connecting to. And then we're connecting to the upstream provider there. So router C goes to upstream, router A goes to the local peer. Notice I've separated the routers. This is very important. Your local peering router should only have the prefixes you want your peer to get access to. If you make A and C the same router, then your local peer can point a default to you and go out through your upstream links. You don't want that. So we separate the routers out. Your local peering router is separate from your upstream router. So that's why I have two there. Very important to do this. So the way we make this work, we announce this 19 aggregate on each link. We accept only the default route from the upstream. Right? We don't need a full BGP table in here. All we need is a default route. The default route says, this is how I get to the whole internet. So we only need a default from the upstream. And we accept all the routes that the local peer originates. So again, everything that AS120 originates, we accept into router A. So default from upstream, local routes here. You're looking at maybe 2, 3, 4 prefixes in your BGP table. It's not very big at all. It's actually very, very simple. Router A configuration going to the local peer. We originate our address block. We send it outbound through a prefix filter to our local peer. From our local peer, we accept what they send us. So they're sending us these two address blocks. And that's all we need to configure. Inbound, we accept their address space. Outbound, we send our address space. And that's all we need for the configuration for the local peer. Notice I've used a prefix filter. In the lab yesterday, we did an AS path filter. So inbound, rather than doing prefixes, we can accept based on the AS path. And this says, accept anything originated by AS120. Okay. So this is much more trusting, because it actually says, I don't care what AS120 originates. Anything that they originate, I'm happy to accept. Could be a bit dangerous, because if they send you something by mistake, you accept it in your network, and things could break. So this is a bit more trusting. So you don't really want to do this. Remember when we did it in the lab yesterday, module 7, we had the AS path filter. Router C configuration, this is towards the upstream, towards AS130. Default route in, my block out, so my/19 outbound. Okay. So again, this is very simple. We're only accepting default, sending our 19 out. So the BGP inside this network, AS110, has default from the upstream, 2 prefixes from the local peer, and the local aggregate, a grand total of 4 prefixes in BGP. So that's not very complicated. And this works perfectly well. Whether the connection is 1 megabit, 100 megabit, gigabit, terabit, it doesn't matter. No big router is needed for doing the BGP. You're handling 4 BGP prefixes and just 2 peers. So this is a very simple configuration. 1 upstream, 1 local peer. As I said, two configurations possible for router A. The AS path filter assumes the peer knows what they're doing. Prefix list is higher maintenance, but it is safer. Some ISPs use both. I mean, at UUNet, we used both. We had a prefix filter, and then we had a backup with an AS path filter, just in case something went wrong. Just, sometimes prefix could be originated by another AS, and our filters would catch something, a mistake made like that. So local traffic goes to and from the local peer, everything else goes to the upstream. If the local peering link breaks, then traffic for the local peer will just go via the upstream. If the link to the upstream breaks, you can still talk to the local peer just fine. Now for private peers, here the ISP is exchanging prefixes they originate. Sometimes your peers may have other ASs, they may have customers as well. As long as you set up filters matching exactly what you expect, things will be okay. So make sure the filters match what you expect. The private peer router should only carry the prefixes you want the private peer to receive. A common mistake that people make is they carry full BGP table on router A or a default route on router A. And when that happens, your private peer can point a default to you and then send all the outbound traffic through your backbone to the internet. So you really don't want to end up in that situation. So the next example is just an extrapolation of the previous one. One upstream local internet exchange point. So rather than connecting to lots of local private peers, all the ISPs meet at an internet exchange point and interconnect their networks there. So again, this is cheaper than running lots of private circuits, and it's cheaper than sending local traffic through your upstream transit provider. So this example is a scaled up version of the previous one. Looks like this. So AS110 here, 130 is towards the upstream. Router A connects into the exchange point. So the exchange point is an Ethernet switch. Each ISP brings the routers to the switch, like that, to the exchange point, and they peer BGP with each other. So I'll show you the configuration on router A to make this work. It's a very typical exchange point configuration. So what do we do here? No different from the previous example. We send our aggregate there. We send our aggregate here. We accept default route from the upstream provider. And we accept the prefixes that these ISPs originate in their networks and send towards you. So again, very simple setup. So that's what I said. We accept all routes originated by the exchange point peers. Accept default from upstream, send our aggregate to upstream and the exchange point peers. Router A configuration. Well, now router A is on the exchange point LAN. We've got an IP address on the LAN. We've got this IXP peers peer group, so we set up this peer group. We use peer groups for this. We've got a filter that says only let our address block out. We strip out private ASs. I put in BGP communities, we might be using them. And then we've got a route map here, set local pref in. I put that in just in case. And what that route map does, any prefix learned from exchange point peer gets a high local preference. I just do that as a matter of course. So that's our peer group for the exchange point. And then we apply it to each neighbor. So this is ISP2, AS100. member of peer group IXP peers, but we filter what the ISP sends us, inbound. Remember, we always have inbound and outbound prefix lists. So we filter what AS100 peer is sending us. Same for 101. Again, we apply them to the peer group, inbound filter. 102, apply to peer group, inbound filter. 103, peer group, inbound filter. And so on for all the exchange point peers. This is a very typical configuration you see at an internet exchange point, where you set up BGP to talk to the other ISPs at the exchange. And then the prefix lists, well, the green one, that's my address block that I'm sending out. And here are my 4 peers at the exchange point, the prefixes that I'm accepting inbound. Here's the route map. We set local preference high on any prefix we learn from our exchange point peers. You don't need this because you're only getting the default from the upstream. But I do this anyway. It's just part of my best practice to make sure that local traffic stays local. Because this route map doesn't make any difference. But if in the future we got prefixes from an upstream provider, say the full BGP feed, and you started hearing these prefixes from your upstream, this route map will do something because it will give higher priority to the prefixes heard across the exchange point LAN. And that's what you want. You want to keep local traffic local, almost at all costs. So notice that router A does not generate the aggregate. Did anybody notice that? No network statement. There's no network statement here. It's a very good reason for that, because, well, I drew the picture on Monday, didn't I? There's a very good reason for all of this. Because you have, well, there's the switch. You've got all the IXP peers here. Your router's there. You've got the link. And here's your backbone. Right, your backbone is there. This is your router A. If you originate the aggregate here, you have IP route to null. Right, so you originate the aggregate. Well, this is fine normally. I mean, you originate the aggregate here. Traffic from your network to the exchange point will go out this way just fine. And the return traffic will go that way just fine. No problem at all. But if this link breaks, well, traffic to any of the exchange point peers will now go through your upstream provider, come in there, but this router still announces the aggregate to the exchange, so the return traffic will go this way and gets dropped into the null interface. It's meant to be a bit. That gets dropped into the null interface. So if you originate originate your aggregate here, and the link breaks, you end up cutting yourself off from your local peers. So you don't generate the aggregate here. So if we don't do that, then if this link breaks, the return traffic will simply go back like that, as it should do. Okay, so that's very important. If you have routers that are not inside your local data centers, they're somewhere else, connected by a single link like that, don't generate the aggregate, because if it becomes disconnected from the backbone, you end up cutting yourself off from a lot of the network. And I already talked about the route map and what it is doing. So the router C configuration going to the upstream provider, that's the same as before. Exactly the same. Default in, address block out. Simple. So this has not been a very complicated setup, has it? I mean, I've set this up for quite a few ISPs, They've probably got one international transit. They take part in the local internet exchange point, and these are the BGP configurations they use. The only thing missing from this has been the iBGP between router C and router A. That's all that was missing. So note the router A configuration, all very straightforward. The exchange point peers. The peering ISPs, the ISP exchange prefixes, they originate sometimes from neighboring ASs as well. Make sure the exchange point baud or router only carries your peering prefixes. Don't put the default route there. Default route goes here, then any of your exchange point peers, or even people you do not peer with at the exchange point, can use you for outbound traffic. So be very careful with this. The simplest workaround here is have a static route for the default pointing to null. Right, so IP route 0.0.0.0/0 to the null interface. And that way your default route on the peering router points to the null interface. So that's best practice. Now let's move on to the next example. 2 upstreams, 1 local peer. So we connect to both upstream transit providers to see the internet to get us redundancy and diversity. So this is the example we did yesterday. We connect to the local peers so that local traffic stays local, and that saves spending valuable dollars on upstream transit costs for local traffic. So it looks like this. Notice again the routers are all separate. C and D are separated. If I made them one router, then I don't have router redundancy. So I separate them. So if C breaks, then I still get backup through D. If D breaks, I get backup through C. The peering router is kept separate because this only carries local routes. You don't have defaults, you don't have full BGP table. So we need 3 routers for this type of situation. To do it, we announce the 19 aggregate on each link. Accept the default route only from upstreams. This is what we did yesterday. We accept the default, so either network 0 or something else. Accept routes originated by local peer. I've talked about the separation of router C and D. Router A, same configuration as before. So router C, very simple. Default in, aggregate out. Router D, default in, aggregate out. The problem with this, as we saw yesterday afternoon, is that we have no outbound traffic engineering. Even inbound, there might be no traffic engineering, but outbound, there definitely is none. Traffic out will take nearest exit. Simple, but if we have diverse international links going to different parts of the world, you end up with really not very good routing. So your load sharing needs to be quite a bit better than this. So what do we do? Well, there are 2 examples, well, 2 ways. We can accept full routing from both upstreams. So this is the standard way. That's what everybody's reaction is. Oh, I need the full BGP table. But this gets really expensive and it can be unnecessary as well. Accept the default for one upstream and some routes from the other. This is much, much cheaper and has exactly the same end result. Right, so I'll show you how to do this, and then I'll show you how to do that. So the first example is using full routes. Okay, router BGP 110, remote AS 130. We've got an inbound filter. Remember, I said always filter. So inbound, we're getting the full BGP table. Remember the list I showed you yesterday in the BGP best practices? All the prefixes that we should not hear. Right, so that's that prefix list here. RFC 1918 deny, I've just given it a name. It lists all the bogons. So the address blocks, the prefixes that we should not hear by BGP, they should not be on the internet. So we throw those away, just in case. Outbound, we send our aggregate. And inbound, we also have a route map. And it's a route map I've called AS130 load share in. And that may seem a bit of a strange name, but I'll just pick the name. But it is a route map that does our load balancing for us. So what is it going to do? Now let me see. Thought I had a picture of it. No, I don't have a picture. Okay. Allow all prefixes, right, so I've done this. Allow prefixes apart from RFC 1918. Route map AS130 load share in. So I'm going to use the whiteboard. So this route map is here. Match IP AS path 10, so we've got this AS path filter list here. Anything that matches this filter we set to what? Local pref 120. If it doesn't, we set to 80. So what's going on here? I think I need to draw it. I thought I'd drawn pictures, but they're not in those slides. Must be in my other version of the presentation. Right, so what we're going to do, so the situation we have is this. Here is AS110. Here is, not what that one is. There's 130. What's the other AS? 140. Okay. So there's 110. Now we know how to do inbound load balancing, right? We send our aggregate out. So if we send our aggregate out here, I'll write it sideways. Aggregate. We send our aggregate out those two links. Anybody in this network, their traffic to get to 110 is going to go that way, right? A customer of AS130, well, aggregate goes out to 130, they're going to send the aggregate down to here. Okay? So traffic from this AS is going to go like this too. Because the best path is 130 to 110, rather than going to upstream here, tier 1 there, upstream here to 140. Right? So getting from this AS to 110, 2 hops versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hops. Okay? So if inbound traffic goes this way, we want outbound traffic to go that way as well. So even if it's something sitting over here, if we did nearest exit would go like this, which is not good because nearest exit will packets go out this way, all the way around here, all the way around, down, 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 long, long way. So that's not very good. So what we want to do is, we don't want that, get rid of it. What we want instead is packets to go like this. We want the packets to go like this to get to that AS. How do we do it? Well, to do it, we need routing information about this AS. So in the BGP session with 110 and 130, we want to accept 130's AS in here, right? So we accept 130 in, and then we want to accept 130 and oops, that says 130 and 130's neighbor, because this is the neighboring AS. That's a way of just saying any neighboring AS to 130. So what we want to do is we want to accept those routes coming in here. we're going to hear the same routes through AS140 as well. So we want to give the ones that come in from 130 a higher local preference so that traffic will go out this way. And that's what this is doing. So we're matching 130 and 130's neighboring AS, and we're setting high local preference. So what will happen now is traffic from this AS down here obviously will take shortest path. 1, 2 AS hops versus 6 going around that way. Outbound traffic, local pref 120 this way. And same for all the other customers and adjacent ASs of AS130. Even from here, AS130's upstream will get in through this filter, local pref 120. Their best path in will be like this, down to there. So the best path from here will be that way as well. See what we're doing? Rather than going all the way around here. So that's how we do the load balancing. And that's what this is doing. So we're matching 130 and 130's neighbor and setting local preference 120. Just for those. Every other prefix we learn from 130, we set local pref 80. So we hear 80 this way, and then we hear it with 100 that way. So it means that traffic that is not 130 and the neighbors will go this way, AS140, and that's how we do outbound load balancing. Right? As I said, use ASs which are closest to you for this, and that gives you your load balancing. Right, so router D, again we just get full BGP feed and throw away the prefixes that we do not hear on the BGP table. So router C, we accept full routes from 130. Tag prefixes originated by 130 and 130's neighbors. Traffic to those ASs will go over the 130 link. The rest of the traffic will go over the 140 link because it's got local pref 100 versus local pref 80 through 130. So that's how we do it. And all your outbound load balancing is done based on that principle. That's how we do it. So if you're connecting to different parts of the world, you need to look at this upstream ISP and see who the adjacent ASs are. Set up a filter to say what the adjacent ASs are, and give them priority for your outbound traffic. Because the return traffic from here to you will go through this provider. It's not going to go another long way around. It will go the short path back. So, and that's how we do it. That's how we do it with a full BGP table. Okay, so summarizing that, full routes and upstreams, it's expensive, needs lots of memory and CPU. Well, I'll tell you why. So here we've got the full example, full routes example. I'm going to draw a table. So from AS130, well, BGP table today, 410,000 prefixes. So let's say we've got 30,000 that come from 130 and its neighbors, and those are local pref 120. And then we've got 380,000 at local pref 80. And from AS140, we get 410,000 at local pref 100. Okay. So that's what we've got. So on our router, we have got 820,000 paths. That's what we have on our router. The BGP table has 820,000 paths. If the link to 140 breaks, the router has got 410,000 paths to pull out of the BGP table, of which 380,000 will be best path. So the router is going to go through the BGP table and do best path selection for 380,000 paths. How long does that take? 1 second, 10 seconds, 5 seconds? 1 minute, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes? It depends on your router's CPU. It could be 5, 10, 15. I've seen some routers take up to 15 minutes to make this change. It can take a really long time to do. So this is why you see this is a bit of a problem. 820,000 paths. If one link goes down, 410,000 paths have to be stripped out of the BGP table. So this is why carrying the full BGP table is not really very good. Right? It's not very good. I mean, it works fine. It's just that failures in infrastructure take a long time to fail over. Here's the alternative. Let's use partial routes. So we ask one upstream for a default. We ask the other upstream for a full BGP table. Upstream providers either give you default or full BGP or both. So what we're going to do is we're going to filter this table based on the neighboring ASN. So rather than accepting 410,000 prefixes and setting local prefs here, we're only going to accept the prefixes that we would set local pref 120 on. So we've got partial. So we're now accepting 30,000 prefixes. And from AS140 we accept 1. Grand total 30,001. So that's the difference. From AS40 we get 140 we get just the default route. From AS130 we only accept the neighboring prefixes and their default. That's it. Nothing more. So we're still getting the full BGP table from AS130, but we're throwing it most of the way. We're putting the filter here, AS path filter here, not in the route map. And all this route map is doing is finding the default route and setting it local pref 80. That's what we're doing. Here's the filter. Again, we pick up AS130 and its neighbors, giving us the 30,000 prefixes here. And we're looking for the default route there, and we're setting local pref 80. So that default becomes the backup. So if the link through AS140 goes, the default through AS130 takes over. This is much cheaper to do. And we look at router D, we accept just the default and send our address block out. So that's alternative. What is the difference between these two situations? As far as the routing system goes, they are exactly the same. Default route is the same as the full BGP table. It's got the whole internet. If the link to AS140 disappears, we have one route to remove from the BGP table. We've got one best path selection to do. That will take a nanosecond. It'll be so fast you won't even know it's happened. For this one prefix to change from 140 to 130. So the default will move from AS140 to AS130. So this is very, very quick and simple. Even if the link to AS130 goes down, removing 30,000 prefixes will take a few seconds. Not really enough for you to notice, and anyway, the default route will disappear first, because it's first in the list. So once the default disappears, you flip over to the other link in any case. So the partial routing solution for multi-homing is much easier, much cheaper to do than trying to do 2 copies of the full BGP table. Okay, so that's what this is doing. Router C configuration, accept full routes from 130. Filter them so only 130 and the neighbors are accepted. Allow the default, set local pref 80 to make it the backup. Traffic to those ASs will go over the 130 link. Traffic to the other ASs will go over the 140 link. If anything fails, backup is via 130 and vice versa. So that's how this all works. And so we don't carry the default route around in BGP inside AS110. We can get OSPF to originate the default route as well. Right? We can point a default to the upstream link, but as long as this exists, the link is up, OSPF will originate the default, if you want to do it this way. Right, so we're using OSPF to determine outbound paths. Right, so this is not expensive. We only carry the routes we need for load sharing. We need to filter on AS paths. Again, this is only an example. You may not get enough traffic on this link. If you don't get enough, add another set. Just add another set of adjacencies, and that will get their neighbors. So it might have tier 1 going around this way as well. So it's quite adjustable what you can do. We just add another AS path, so we allow 3 AS hops away through that particular link. So that's a strategy for doing multi-homing to 2 upstreams and trying to get symmetric traffic flows. So this is very good, sadly for those of you who are connecting or considering connecting to very diverse service providers. And that way you can try and get good symmetric traffic flows for your network. Again, as I said, on the peering routers, make sure you have the route to null, default route to null, so that traffic, if anybody tries to point a default route to your peering router, it can be discarded. So the next one we'll look at, 3 upstreams and equal bandwidths. Right, so we've got ISP network. This is actually a real example I had to configure a few years ago. So I wrote it down here, what we actually had to do. And this ISP, well, a few years ago, 16 megabits to one upstream, 8 meg to another, 4 meg to another. They're all satellite connections, 16, 8, and 4. So what strategy do we adopt here? I mean, they were completely stuck, so they came and asked me what to do. Well, one option is to get the full table from each upstream provider, which means 400,000 prefixes, giving us a total of 1.2 million paths. That's rather a lot. 1.2 million paths is quite a lot. Probably more than you really want to have sitting on your routers. The other option is to use a partial table, and that's what we ended up doing. But the question is, how do we do this with a partial table? Well, the strategy here is we need 2 external routers. We don't need 3. Just 2. We only ever need 2 routers to connect to upstream providers. That gives us enough redundancy. As soon as we go to 3 or 4 or 5, it gets very complicated. So 2 external routers. We connect the biggest bandwidth to one router. So the 16 meg connection goes to one router. The other router takes the other 2. So the 8 plus the 4 make 12. So we've got the 12 meg on the other router. So that way, if one link fails, one router fails, then at least we have almost half our bandwidth available for the backup. Okay? Use the biggest link as a default. That may seem counterintuitive, but actually this makes sense, because you want to minimize the number of prefixes you get on your network. So the biggest pipe we use for default routes, and we do the traffic engineering on the smaller links. It's much easier to do traffic engineering on small pipes and use the big pipe as a default. Trying to do traffic engineering on a big pipe is very difficult because you need 95% of the BGP table. So it just gets very expensive and hard to do. Whereas doing traffic engineering on the small links, you probably only need 10% of the BGP table. So the picture looks like this. Got AS100. 110 is upstream with the 16 meg. 120 is 8 meg. 130 is 4 meg. So we've got 4 plus 8 is 12 out of router B and 16 out of router A. Make sense? It's better than having 3 different routers trying to do it. So we balance it like this. The available BGP feeds you can get from your transit provider. You can get the full table. You can get customer prefixes and the default. I'm not sure why this is useful, but that's what they were offering, or the default route. So the useful ones are the full BGP table and the default route. These are the common options. If you go to a transit provider today, they will say you can have full BGP or default. They're very unlikely to give you anything else. And if they give you anything else, it's going to be harder for them to manage and harder for you to manage. So let's see what to do. We accept default route from the provider with the largest connectivity. So ISPA, 16 meg connection, we accept the default route. Because most of the traffic is going to use this link. Default route is the same as the full BGP table. If they won't give you a default, unusual these days, then run BGP with them, throw everything away, and use the static route hack instead. Distribute the default in ISIS or OSPF. And for the other two, request the full BGP table, but we are going to throw most of it away. So that's the important piece. We're going to do the same thing as we did here. We accept the full route from the smaller links, smaller ISPs, but we're only going to accept the neighbors. We're not going to accept many prefixes at all. Again, so we can get the symmetric traffic flow I was drawing there. What's the outbound load balancing strategy? So what are you going to decide to keep and throw away? Now, as I said before, most of the traffic is going to use the link to ISP-A. That's the biggest link. So you want to fill it up. And the other two links, that's where you do your traffic engineering. They're smaller, so you have a smaller subset of traffic running there. We discard the prefixes transiting the global transit ISPs. We look for the tier 1 ASs. Anything that has gone through the tier 1s, so these folks up here, the tier 1s, anything that's gone through that, we want to throw away. Because we're going to hear those through our biggest link, through the defaults. So let's not take those. Also, we're going to discard prefixes that have ISP-A's ASN in the path. Yes, B and C, you're going to see your other upstream AS in the path as well, more than likely. So it makes more sense for traffic going to ISP-A to go direct link, not through B or C. So here the ASs of the tier 1s. Yeah, global crossing disappeared and is now owned by level 3. That must have changed just a few weeks ago, because last time I did this presentation about 4 weeks ago, 3356 was still global crossing, so I don't know. Anyway, it's now reporting level 3. So these are the global transit ASs. So what we're going to do is, we're going to throw away all prefixes that have these ASs in the AS path. We're going to throw those ASNs away. So this is the filter we have on ISP-B's peering. They send us the full BGP table. We throw away AS209 701, 1239, 3356, 3549, 3561, 2914, and 7018. Okay. And if you do that, you actually get rid of about 70% of the BGP table. It's quite amazing. You get rid of about 70% of the BGP table. We're on the ISP-B connection, so we don't want to hear any prefixes with ISP-A in the path. Nor do we want to hear any prefixes with ISP-C in the path, because we have a direct link. Now we want to allow ISP-B. Want to allow ISP-B, ISP-B's neighbors, and their neighbors, as I've written down here. And that means traffic from this network, AS100, to ISP-B will go through ISP-B's link. Traffic from this AS to ISP-B customers will go through the link, and to their customers' customers will go through the link as well. And we can change this AS path, this whole AS path filter, until we get enough outbound traffic on the link to ISP-B. And we can just modify it until we get enough outbound traffic. Too much traffic, remove a line. Not enough traffic, add a line. Still not enough traffic, think about removing one of the tier 1s. So we get the prefixes coming in. Those are the strategies that you can do. There's a lot you can vary in this. Right, so we drop the global transit ISP prefixes. You can fine tune it if you don't have enough traffic volume. More prefixes in, more traffic out. Drop the transit prefixes transiting A and C. Permit prefixes from B, their neighbors, the neighbors, 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 and so forth. We can vary that AS path permit until we get the right amount of traffic. We can do the same thing for ISP-C as well. Right? Exactly the same thing for ISP-C. Right? So we build the same type of AS path filter, prefixes heard from both ISP-B and C, and that lets us establish, again, how close they are. Right? You may find that there are customers of ISP-B and C that multi-home between their networks. So then it doesn't really matter. But if ISP-B, for example, is in Japan, and the neighboring AS is in Europe, yet ISP-C might also be in Europe. So you need to be a bit sensible about what you accept and discard. You need to do a bit of research. When ISPs have helped with this type of load balancing, you look at the upstream provider, and then you try and find out all the ASs which are immediate neighbors of that upstream. Certainly if you're getting into the regional or multinational providers, the AS appears everywhere in the world. So even if you connect to them in Europe, you might end up with weird routing because they're present in North America as well, or even in Asia. Like NTT, AS2914, they're present in Hong Kong, present in Tokyo, present in Los Angeles, present in Frankfurt. So wherever you connect to them, it will appear that they're always the closest. So it might seem that their Hong Kong customer is next door to them in Frankfurt. So you need to be a little bit intelligent about where you're connecting and which ASs you're accepting or discarding. So even saying this in a simple slide, there's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done. You see why 3 upstream providers is complicated? Again, it depends who they are. This can get really quite complicated if you're not careful. What about inbound load balancing? Well, the largest outbound link should announce just the aggregate. Right, so the largest link is accepting just the default. So the largest outbound link should announce just the aggregate. The other links announce the aggregate as well, so you get backup, but do an AS path prepend, or 2. Sub-prefixes of the aggregate announce these out the links as well, depending on traffic volumes. Or maybe according to services. You might have broadband customers. They don't pay you very much per month. but they've got big bandwidths, well, announce their address block on a link that's not very big. So when the link fills up, too bad. And it protects the rest of your network so that your commercial customers can use the remaining capacity. Too many people are happy to put in load balancers and rate limiters and so forth. ISPs don't need to do that. You just need to be intelligent about how you design your network. Rate limiters, load balancers really destroy the TCP connectivity. The UDP is random anyway. There's no checking of delivery. But TCP, three-way handshake, and rate limiters are notoriously bad at really making the IP or the TCP connectivity very, very poor quality. So you really want to avoid those as much as you can. Try and use network design, traffic engineering to determine what folks are getting. For example, here, the link to ISPV could be just for broadband customers. So you number the customers out of one contiguous sub-prefix, one subnet. Announce that subnet out the B link. Once it fills up with incoming traffic, too bad. That's all they get. Okay? ISPC could be used for commercial lease line customers. There could be lease line customers who want a very, very special service. You never want the link to fill up. You might have a 1-to-1 ratio. Well, that way, again, number them out of the contiguous subnet such that their address space is announced out towards ISPC. And that way, no matter what happens in your network, there will always be space. Okay? There will always be space. I don't know, I really don't know what Apple is doing some of these days. There will always be space on the ISPC link for what they're doing. We did this at UUNet. We didn't buy any rate limiters. Right? We didn't like them. And they were not very good in those days either. They're still not very good now either, for that matter. We had special customers. We had a 2 megabit service for customers who paid a lot of money to always get 2 megabits. And we connected them in such a way that I think there was something, they were running on a 2-to-1 contention ratio. Our standard lease line customers were 6-to-1. Right, so for every 6 megabits of bandwidth, we bought 1 megabit international. For our dial-up and other home consumers, we ran 30-to-1. So for every 30 megabits of bandwidth, we bought 1 megabit international. That was our contention ratio, but these special customers were 2-to-1. And we announced them out of one of our connections, our international connections. So we numbered them all out of the same address block, and we announced them out of this one connection. And that way, we guaranteed that they always got the bandwidth that they paid for. And that worked very well. There was not a single rate limiter in sight in our network. And I've worked with quite a few ISPs over the years. We have usually managed to get rid of the rate limiters. We get rid of the rate limiters and instead design the network so that customers get the right experience for what they pay for. Of course, the rate limiter salespeople are very good. They say, oh, buy rate limiter, it will let you control all your customers. Actually, it makes the internet experience for the customers really bad. If you look at how these things work, you'll see that it's actually very, very bad. They randomly discard packets. They don't have good failure modes. If the link gets full or the particular customer is using too much traffic according to its policy, there's no gentle reduction in the bandwidth. It just randomly drops packets, which results in TCP retries, and so you end up with a very spiky internet connection like that. There's so much research being done with these things. If you're sensible, you will not use rate limiters because they really make a very bad internet experience for your customers. Right, so this is the router A configuration. Right, we've got the default route from the upstream, aggregate outbound to the upstream. So that one was simple. router B configuration, well, here we have the route map I was talking about. Sorry, the filter list I was talking about, throwing away the tier 1s and so on and so forth. Outbound prefix list sends just an aggregate out. And the route map, well, we'll see what that does in the next slide. This one, route map does a prepend. Remember I said announce the aggregate with a prepend. Here's a link to router C. It's got its own filter as well, AS path filter. Again, the aggregate going out, and maybe the sub prefix as well. And then the route map, and that probably has got 2 prepends. So let's see. Right. Prefix list to ISPB sends a 19 and 1 sub prefix. So I've said, right, this is my dial customer. So my home consumers pay nothing, want huge bandwidth, not going to get it. This one is my business customers, so my special business customers who want a guarantee of bandwidth. So they go on this /22 and they go on the ISPC link. Everything else goes on ISP-A link. Now the aggregate being announced to ISP-B, single prepend. ISP to aggregate to ISP-C has 2 prepends. So that's the sort of thing that we're trying to do. Other thing is, if you get too much traffic coming in, or not enough, you can vary the prepend, and you can vary the size of the sub-prefix being leaked out as well, as we did yesterday. So this is just an extension of the example that we finished off with last night. Outbound backup, we've got the default route from ISP-A by eBGP, mostly discarded full BGP from ISPs B and C. So it becomes a very cheap BGP table as well. The last ISP I helped, it was something like this. They got one default, 10,000 and 30,000. Was it 10? No, it was 10 and 20,000 prefixes. They were carrying, again, 30,000 prefixes in BGP. Before I arrived, they had 1.2 million paths. Now they have 30,000 paths. If a link fails, the network recovers 10 minutes faster than it used to carrying the full BGP table. 10 minutes is a long time on the internet, especially when you're browsing a website that stops working. If it stops working for 10 minutes, you're going to get pretty annoyed. So they can now fail over the network. If any link fails, it's in a matter of seconds. Nobody really notices. So outbound backup. So originate default route into OSPF or ISIS and router A. That's the primary, so metric 10, backup metric 30. On router B, static default to ISP-B, static default to ISP-C. We make them different distances, just so we get main link to B and backup to C. When the link goes down, the static route disappears. This static route is used so that OSPF originates a default. But OSPF will only originate a default if there's another entry in the routing table. That's what default originate does. So the steady state, all links are up and active. Default route is to router A. OSPF metric 10. Default line by eBGP means the default is in the RIB, means OSPF will originate the default. Backup is to router B, OSPF metric 20. The eBGP prefixes learned from upstreams are distributed throughout the backbone. You can filter the default out of IBGP if you want, but link to ISP-A goes down, B and C stays up. The default route is now to router B, metric 20, because eBGP default disappears from router A, goes from the RIB, OSPF router A withdraws its default route. The above is true if link to B or C is down as well, either B or C, it swaps around. Link to B or C is down, link to A is up, then the default route is to router A, metric 10, that is the best path. Other considerations, Default route should not be propagated to devices terminating non-transit peers. I've said that already. Peering routers, make sure they do not have default, make sure they do not have full BGP table, very important. You rarely need to carry any default in IBGP. I actually filter it out. I haven't talked about it, but typical ISP design is to have the backbone, like the core routers, full BGP, edge routers, access, just partial BGP. And in the partial BGP, don't send your default. Don't send it. Use OSPF, ISIS to carry the default around. It's much faster. So here's an example. Say on upstream router, is this? Yeah, router A, this is going to the upstream. IBGP peer group. Just remember, prefix list, IBGP filter out. IBGP filter denies the default route, permit everything else. Right, so we just drop the default route. Or the other thing you can do is use a BGP community. You can match the default, set community, no advertise, which might be cheaper than doing it this way. Who knows? Okay? So that's another typical example. Right, so this example is based on many working configurations. There are many variations possible on this, but this shows you what to do with 3 upstream providers. It's very easy to tune. It's light on border router resources. It's quite light on the backbone router infrastructure as well. And the thing is, with a sparse BGP table, the convergence is much faster. We're talking seconds rather than minutes. So this is really one of the best ways of trying to do multi-homing without carrying lots of copies of the full BGP table. Okay, so that is it. So with those 2 presentations, you now know how to do multi-homing. Because everything there is with multi-homing is based on the examples I showed you here last night and in this set of slides. Everything else is practice and experience. Okay? So all the multi-homing situations I've come across pretty much anywhere are all solvable using the techniques I've talked about over the last 3 hours. Okay? So if you've understood how this works, you should be able to take these examples and apply them for your own situation as well.